HR told me to accept the 60% pay cut or leave. Then I made one phone call that changed everything. My name is Colton Mercer. I'm in my mid-40s, and for the last 15 years I've given my life to a mid-sized manufacturing company in Ohio. I've missed birthdays, skipped vacations, stayed late more times than I can count, all because I believed loyalty mattered. I believed if I gave them my best, they'd look out for me in return. I was wrong. That day I sat across from Elaine Drucker, the head of HR, in a gray little conference room with no windows. She didn't even pretend to care. She folded her hands, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Colton, the company is going through some budget cuts. Unfortunately, we'll need to slash your salary by 60%. If that doesn't work for you, you're welcome to clear out your desk." I thought I'd misheard her. 60%. That's not a cut, it's a gut punch. I told her I'd been with the company longer than half the people in management. I told her I'd trained most of the younger managers who were now running departments I built from the ground up. She just shrugged like none of that mattered. "It's nothing personal," she said flatly. "This is just business." But it felt personal. It felt like betrayal. For years I had given my everything to that place, only to find out I was nothing more than a number on a spreadsheet. Replaceable. Disposable. Walking out of that room, I looked around the office at faces I'd once considered teammates. Most of them were kids I'd trained. Some wouldn't even meet my eye. A few smirked like they knew this was coming. That stung more than the pay cut itself. I went home that night sick to my stomach. I kept hearing Elaine's voice, cold and careless, telling me to take it or leave. I couldn't believe after all I had given this was how it ended. But what she didn't know, and what I was just starting to realize, was that I wasn't going to take this lying down. The next morning I dragged myself into the office, still raw from what Elaine had told me. I kept my head down, but it didn't take long before whispers reached me. Tyson Velez, the kid I'd trained from scratch, was suddenly in meetings I used to run. His name was showing up on schedules where mine used to be. And when I overheard one manager say Tyson's new package was higher than the reduced pay they'd offered me, something inside me cracked. So the budget cuts weren't about saving money, they were about pushing me out. That night at home, Marla could see it written all over me. She put dinner on the table, touched my hand and said softly, "Don't let them break you, Colton. You've carried that place for years. They can't erase that." I wanted to believe her, but the humiliation burned too deep. It wasn't just about money. It was about being tossed aside for someone I had taught everything to. The truth became even harder to swallow when June Cavanaugh, who'd worked in accounting forever, pulled me aside in the hallway. She looked around before whispering, "Colton, I shouldn't even say this, but I heard them in the break room. They were laughing about how guys like you, old-timers, their word, will take any deal just to hang on. They think you'll swallow whatever they give you." Her words hit like a slap. So that was it. They thought I'd roll over because of my age, because of my loyalty, because I had a mortgage and responsibilities. They thought I was predictable, safe to exploit. I forced a smile and thanked June, but inside my blood boiled. Every insult, every fake smile from management, every smug look from Tyson, it all blended into a fire I couldn't put out. They believed I'd stay quiet, that I'd accept being humiliated just to keep a chair in their building. They had no idea what was coming. I went back to Elaine's office one last time, hoping maybe reason could get through where loyalty hadn't. I laid it out plain: 15 years of work, knowledge that no one else on that floor had, the respect of people I'd trained. She didn't flinch. Her voice was clipped like she'd practiced it 100 times. "Take the cut or clear out your desk by Friday." That was it. No room for discussion, no acknowledgement of what I'd given. Just a deadline hanging over me like a hammer. As I walked out, the pieces started to fit together. Tyson wasn't the only one being lined up. I overheard scraps of conversation half-whispered in hallways. It wasn't just me they were after. They were trimming anyone over 45, anyone who might one day collect a full pension. That's where the real money was being saved. It wasn't efficiency. It was a purge. The realization left me with a knot in my stomach. They had built an entire plan to bleed people like me out quietly, one by one, until none of us were left. For a moment I felt the walls close in. Mortgage, bills, responsibilities. I couldn't just walk away. And they knew it. That was the trap. But fear has a way of sharpening resolve. Instead of folding, I started watching, listening, collecting. I kept copies of emails. I wrote down things I overheard. I tucked away details that others ignored. Little pieces of a puzzle I knew could matter. And then I remembered someone. Victor Hanley. Years back he'd been a client who'd trusted me to straighten out a complicated project when no one else could. We'd stayed in touch. Now he was no ordinary contact. He had climbed high all the way into a regulatory position with teeth. For the first time since this nightmare began, a thought flickered. Maybe I wasn't as powerless as they believed. I sat in my car during lunch break staring at my phone, thumb hovering over the screen. I'd thought about it for days, but now there was no backing out. I scrolled to Victor Hanley's number, a name that felt like the only lifeline I had left. My hand shook as I hit call. The line clicked and then his voice came through, steady and familiar. "Colton? Been a long time." Hearing that tone, warm, respectful, like nothing had changed between us, nearly broke me. I swallowed hard and forced myself to speak. I told him everything. The pay/slash they tried to force on me, the way they were clearing out anyone close to retirement age, and the shady financial games I'd begun to notice. I didn't leave out a single detail. For 15 minutes I laid bare the betrayal, the lies, the manipulation, every bit of it. Victor didn't interrupt. He just listened. When I finally stopped, the silence on his end stretched long enough to make me wonder if I'd said too much. Then he spoke, calm but firm. "You did the right thing calling me. Leave it with me." Those words landed like a lifeline being thrown across a chasm. For the first time in weeks, the pressure in my chest eased. The company thought they had me cornered, but now I wasn't standing alone. Someone with authority, someone who respected me, was stepping in. I ended the call and sat there, phone still in my hand, breathing differently than I had in days. The weight wasn't gone, but it had shifted. And that small shift was everything. It started quietly. A pair of strangers walked through the front doors one morning, dressed too sharp to be salesmen, carrying folders instead of clipboards. They didn't make announcements or draw attention, just moved from office to office with polite smiles and questions that seemed harmless on the surface. I kept my eyes on my screen, though my ears caught everything. The click of their shoes in the hallway. The way they lingered by certain doors. The sudden silence when they entered a room. It was subtle, but the atmosphere shifted. By midday, Elaine's stride had lost its usual snap. She passed by my desk with her jaw tight, whispering something to Tyson as they disappeared into a conference room. The blinds snapped shut behind them. A few minutes later, another manager rushed in. That door didn't open again for almost an hour. Around the office, people traded glances. Some leaned close, murmuring in low voices, pretending to shuffle papers while their eyes tracked the visitors. No one asked questions out loud, but unease spread like smoke. Everyone could feel something wasn't right. I didn't say a word. Didn't ask, didn't speculate. I just sat in my chair, tapping at keys as if nothing unusual was happening at all. But inside I was watching every move, taking in every nervous twitch and hurried whisper. For the first time in a long while, it wasn't me under the microscope. And that silence, my silence, was its own kind of power. The visitors stopped being polite guests and started acting like they owned the place. Requests turned sharp. They wanted files, ledgers, records that weren't usually pulled unless audits were scheduled months in advance. Assistants scurried back and forth with stacks of binders, their arms shaking under the weight. The hum of printers and copiers never slowed. One afternoon, as I passed the hallway near HR, a voice cut through the air. Elaine's voice, high, furious, stripped of its usual polish. "You said the transfers wouldn't be traced." The words snapped like a whip. Tyson's muffled reply came fast, defensive, but I couldn't catch it all. So I'd heard enough. Transfers. Traceable. The pieces fit together with sickening clarity. They weren't just trimming payroll. They were moving money, hiding it, using cuts as cover to plug the holes they'd made themselves. Every sacrifice they demanded from us was just a mask for their own theft. I walked back to my desk slowly, each step heavier than the last. It wasn't just betrayal of me or even of the older workers they were pushing out. It was betrayal of everyone, of the company itself, gutted from the inside by the very people who claimed to protect it. The air in the building grew sharper by the hour. Elaine barked at staff in clipped tones. Tyson avoided eye contact altogether. Managers darted into side rooms, whispering behind closed doors. The tension was no longer subtle. It pressed on everyone's chest, undeniable. The trap they had set for me was now snapping shut around them. And I didn't need to lift a finger to tighten the rope. Victor called me late in the evening, his tone steady but heavier than before. He didn't waste time. Serious violations, he said. Those 2 words carried more weight than any speech. The investigation had uncovered far more than rumors. There was proof, hard proof, and the net was wide. HR wasn't clean. The upper floor wasn't clean. Even Tyson's name was tangled in it. I sat at my kitchen table, phone pressed to my ear, listening as he laid out the scope. Fraud, misappropriation, patterns that stretched back years. They hadn't just been greedy, they'd been sloppy, arrogant enough to leave trails. Then came the part one knew was coming. Victor told me my records could help. Notes, copies, emails I'd tucked away over time. He asked if I was willing to turn them over. My chest tightened. The thought of stepping directly into the storm made my hands tremble, but the decision was already made. I gathered everything I had and passed it along without hesitation. When I set the folder down in front of the investigators the next day, I caught my reflection in the glass wall beside us. My face looked drawn, but my eyes were steady. Nervous? Absolutely. But underneath the nerves was something stronger. A resolve that none of them could touch. For the first time, it wasn't me cornered by threats. It was them caught in a trap of their own making. Justice wasn't a distant idea anymore. It was standing in the room with us. The storm finally broke on a gray morning that started like any other. Phones rang, keyboards clattered, and then the front doors swung wide. Agents in dark jackets swept in with purpose, badges flashing. Their voices were firm, direct, leaving no room for doubt. The entire floor froze. Elaine was the first name called. She tried to hold her composure, but the color drained from her face as they clicked cuffs around her wrists. The sound echoed louder than the office had ever been. Tyson didn't fare much better. He sat stiff in a chair while 2 agents stood over him, questions firing faster than he could answer. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by a hollow stare. One by one, the higher-ups were pulled aside. Some shouted protests, others sagged in defeat. Doors slammed, papers scattered, and the illusion of control shattered right in front of everyone's eyes. The same managers who strutted the halls with arrogance were suddenly exposed, their secrets dragged into the open. Around me, co-workers whispered in disbelief. Faces pale, mouths slightly open, no one seemed to know what to say. People who had spent years bowing to these so-called leaders now watched them crumble, stripped of power in the harshest way possible. I stayed where I was, seated at my desk, hands folded, silent. My heart beat steady as I watched the scene unfold. No gloating, no smiles, just quiet, steady observation. The sting I'd carried for weeks eased with every step they took in disgrace. What they had forced on me was now reflected back at them, magnified 100 times. Their humiliation was public, undeniable. And I didn't have to lift a hand to make it happen. The days that followed were nothing short of chaos. Headlines painted the company in disgrace, penalties stacked high, and new overseers were brought in to tear down what was left of the old guard. Entire departments were reorganized, policies rewritten, and the once untouchable names on the top floor were erased from office doors. Amid all this, I was summoned to a meeting with the interim leadership. They slid papers across the table, an offer to restore everything I had lost, back pay included. They spoke of wanting stability, of how my experience could help rebuild what had been broken. Their words were careful, respectful, almost pleading. I listened, but my answer came without hesitation. I declined. No sum could erase what they had done, no position could restore the loyalty they had shattered. Instead, I chose the severance, signed my name, and stood to leave. Not defeated, not bitter, simply finished. When I walked through my front door, Marla was waiting. She didn't ask what I had decided, she saw it in my eyes. She wrapped her arms around me, and for the first time in months, I felt lighter. She whispered, "You did it your way." That night, I sat quietly in my own home, the noise of the office far behind me. It wasn't victory I felt, not even revenge. It was something better. Self-respect, reclaimed and untouchable. They had tried to strip it from me, but I had walked away with it intact. That was worth more than any paycheck. Looking back, it still amazes me how a single decision shifted the ground beneath an entire company. One call, one moment where I chose not to stay silent, set a chain of events in motion that exposed everything festering beneath the surface. It wasn't only about me, it reached every worker who had been quietly squeezed, dismissed, or pushed out. The people who thought they had no voice finally saw proof that the abuse wasn't theirs to carry alone. The deepest cuts never come from strangers. They come from the places you give your trust, the people you stand beside for years believing you're on the same side. That's why it stung the way it did. Loyalty turned into leverage against me. Respect turned into weakness in their eyes. That's what betrayal feels like. It strips you of the illusion that commitment is enough. But betrayal doesn't have to be the end. Sometimes it's the spark. When you stand your ground, when you refuse to accept being trampled, the balance shifts. Suddenly the ones who thought they held all the cards are the ones scrambling to defend themselves. That's what I saw unfold, piece by piece, until the very walls they built around themselves collapsed. I walked away not with revenge, not with riches, but with something harder to break. My integrity. They couldn't buy it back, couldn't erase it, couldn't twist it into something they owned. It was mine and I carried it with me out the door.